Joining us now is one of the most accredited, most highly regarded citizens of America. I think you have like an intelligence award from the government or something like that. Justin Jacobs joining us now on the Truth Teller line. Justin, you're some sort of like intelligence officer or something.
Not quite. So sort of. How do I phrase it properly? So I worked for the Department of Defense for approximately 12 years, working in mission foundations, working directly with the military. And then I spent 9 years at a national laboratories working on national security programs. So during that time, I worked some high-profile programs, which was pretty fun. It did result in the awards that you were trying to mention before. So I got a Presidential Early Career Award from President Obama. So I got to go to the White House and meet him and dap him up. I got a.
Did he give you a dap or a handshake?
A handshake. Yeah.
Oh no, he so he was shaking the hands of like everyone, very professional. And then one guy made a comment to him saying, "Oh, I play basketball," and he's like, "Oh, all right, awesome." And he gives him a bro hug kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I was about 4 people behind him, and I came up and I said, God, I rushed it so quick too. I'm surprised you even heard anything I said. I said, if you ever want to come up and have a good game of basketball, come up to Fort Meade, NSA. We'd love to have you. And he pulled me in. He gave me a hug and he goes, a baller. I like that. And slapped me on the shoulder. And we're in the East Wing and there's like 100 people there. And I go around to the other side and everyone's like, what did you say to him? So I was like, I basically just challenged him to a game of basketball. So I want to say about a year later, he actually came up to the National Security Agency and it was the first sitting president that came, I think, since Bill Clinton.
Wow.
I know, it's only George Bush in between, but
still,
yeah, so it was a big deal. He was actually the first Democratic. Oh no, so Clinton wasn't up here. He was the first Democratic since Carter who had visited. So I think Reagan visited beforehand. I also got the OD&I Battalion Award. So I was one of the point men for building a iris recognition program. So you can actually, if you take an image, you can extract out someone's iris and then turn that into a 2-dimensional barcode. And we use that for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So that way, if a kid has gone missing, and say they pop up 20 years later on a driver's license registration form, you can actually match the iris code to a kid at age 2 to when they're like 36. And actually the first person we found using the algorithm had been missing for over 30 years and didn't realize they were a kidnapped person.
Wow.
I was the statistician for that, the data scientist that worked that program. So I was probably third in command on that project. But that resulted in a OD&I Medallion Award Office of the OD&I Office of Director of National Intelligence. So James Clapper, I got to go meet him. So those are probably the 2 big ones. But it's always fun to tell those stories because like I always feel so good when good things happen. And so I'm just happy to be part of it, let alone any type of recognition. It's more the feel good of when things work out.
We have like a literal code breaker here, Mayes. I mean,
That's real. Yeah.
You turned your eyes
Justin,
into a barcode.
can you get a reading on a third iris?
Yeah.
No, I don't know, man. Only the ones I can see. Yeah, the technology's not there yet.
Not quite there yet, fellas. But that's why we're here. We're here to help people open up those third eyes and discover truths that remain hidden to the naked eye. And so, Justin,
all that is not as important as what he's doing on the NBA side.
That's what I'm about to say. Like, that's all well and good, finding missing children and all that stuff. But no, we've got serious work here that we got to get to.
Yeah. So, Justin, we got in touch because I had done the Michael Jordan 1988 Defensive Player of the Year award, underlying statistics, drawing all sorts of scrutiny because of some shoddy apparent stat keeping. And a bunch of people asked me, hey, have you talked to Justin Jacobs about this? And I said I hadn't. I'm going to go reach out to Justin because you are like I want to say, like, if there's a Mount Rushmore of NBA researchers or historians, you're on it. I don't think anyone has watched more vintage NBA film than you have in your, basketball research for the Orlando Magic, the Houston Rockets, and the league office. You're in charge of, analyzing on-court, off-court data, what have you. But part of the problem with a lot of this analysis in modern day NBA is we can't go back to like pre-1996 because the play-by-play data hasn't been standardized across, the NBA. So correct me if I'm wrong here, Justin, you're attempting to create a plus minus or at least stint data when certain players are on the floor, certain players are off the floor. Going back to basically NBA history, you're attempting to do this by hand by watching all of these old film and old VHS tapes that have been digitized, and you're trying to do this by hand. Is that fairly accurate?
That is exceptionally accurate. So this started because I was curious. I didn't know much about the 1960s and 70s. Let's start with that. I'm a 1980 product. I started watching basketball when I was a kid, and it was LA Lakers growing up as a Los Angelino. So when folks are like, well, pace is so different back in the 60s, I didn't understand that. When they said shooting was much worse, I didn't really understand to what extent. So I was on detail. I was actually on a deployment overseas when I was working as a civilian in the National Security Agency, and there's a lot of downtime there. You either get swole and go to the gym every single day, you either get fat because you go to the AFES Burger King every day, or you lose your mind because you're not doing anything. Like, you work 12 hours a day and you got nothing for 12 hours a day, and that's just a repeat cycle every day for so many months. So I started going on to games on YouTube, and this is like 2010, 2011. I went on games on YouTube and started building a play-by-play box score for every game that I'd watch. So I have like 1960 Celtics games where I have literally every second and every play mapped out with lineups and everything. The problem is it takes about 8 hours to do that by hand. It is too much. So I've done special games. I did Wilt Chamberlain's fourth quarter, all from radio. And there's some really interesting things about the Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game, right?
Yeah.
There's some interesting things about it. The final score that's on NBA.com is not correct. It's actually wrong. There's like a missing 8 points.
We're gonna come back to that.
Right?
Yeah.
That's fine. But that kind of puts a little precursor on, sometimes the stats we have back in the day aren't quite right. It's going to be an interpretation of who's ever recording the data. So I ended up just saying, well, let's just build stint data instead. I can get through a game in approximately an hour to hour and a half, depending on the quality of the video. All I do is
stint data you're talking about. Sorry to interrupt. That's who's on the floor, who's off the floor.
That's correct. So, I wish I could have brought hold up my notebooks. I got a stack of notebooks that is probably bigger than the amount I could fit on the screen. Notes. Yes. So everything's done by hand. And then what I do is I transfer over, and then I have about 7 programs to try and match scores. Make sure that stints all even out, make sure that offensive and defensive stints even out, make sure that players are consistent across the board. So there's multiple levels. And then I have a couple fact checkers as well that will pick spontaneous, like random games, and then double check to see if they've gotten the same things. So it's not quite a single person mission, but there are a handful of, I am the only one who's generating the database itself. So I started building stint data. And then I'm sure you guys are well aware of this person, but Ben Taylor, I had a conversation with, and he made an off-key comment to me, 2016 maybe, and was like, it'd be really nice to know if we could build an actual database and get like RAPM numbers. And I was like, well, I'm already kind of doing it, so why not just go all in? So I spend 2 to 3 hours every night and upwards of 4 to 6 hours every weekend, every day off, just populating games. So on an off day, I can get about 5 or 6 games in. Any type of work day, I get about 2 games in. And on top of that, I was working with the league office for quite a while at that time as a part-time job on top of the work I'm doing at the national labs. But I've gotten through, I want to say a little over 1,800 games from between 1979 and 1996. Predominantly the Michael Jordan era games, because people were arguing, how good is Michael Jordan? And I'm like, well, he's got the largest video catalog going back play-by-play era. Mm-hmm. Let's try and encapsulate as many of those games as possible, but at the same time, grab as much Magic, grab as much Larry as we can. In fact, let me see if I can write this quick here. I can give you a player game count on some of the players I got, if it runs fast enough. But there we go.
Yeah, in that 88 season, I think, at least last I checked, you had 43 Bulls games. And Michael played all 82 that year. So you have 43 just in that season. And that's the most of any team, I believe. So 88 season, I've only gotten my hands on 6 tapes to hand chart. And you've watched 43 games. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. So 43 out of 1,800. How many Michael Jordan games across the whole span do you have?
341 Michael Jordan games logged, 267 Scottie Pippen, but 215 of Byron Scott. Yeah,
let's go.
So 200 of Robert Parrish. So I've got a good amount of years on these guys. Larry Bird's 158, but I haven't gotten through the 86 season yet.
When you say you've got 300 some odd of Michael Jordan's games, these are all pre-96, because anything post-96 has already been charted.
That's correct.
All right. And then that's a huge segment then, because they're talking basically 84 to 93, because he's out 94 and 95, and then you also have to factor in his second season. He was hurt for most of it, so you got a high percentage of these Jordan games tabulated, basically.
That's right. I have approximately 60% of all of Michael Jordan's games in the pre-play-by-play era. It is by far the most of all players. Larry Bird, if I'm going from 84 to 96, because again, I'm focusing more on the Jordan years, I'm sitting on approximately 50% of Larry Bird's games too. So I have a good chunk. Magic Johnson's even more. I have probably about 50 to 55% of Magic Johnson's games from 84 to 96. When you get before that 1985 season, so the year Michael Jordan's North Carolina years, it's just less video. And Tom actually made a comment about this in his Yahoo article, saying that he had to reach out to the European faction, if you will. I'll call him a faction. I think you worked with Reynes on getting video. Reynes. So there's a couple guys to work with out there. So there's Derek, and I forget which country he's from. There's Derek, there's Alexander, who's out of Serbia, and then there's Alex, who's out of Belgium, if I remember correctly. And those guys have hefty catalogs that you can go and get games from. So if I don't get the games directly from YouTube, or if I don't get them from the league office directly, so when I was working with the league office, I would get some games handed to me. I would go to those guys. And the only challenge with it is all those guys are Michael Jordan collectors first. So if you want to get a bunch of Armin Gilliam games from 1978, you might get 5 if you're lucky. And that's because a couple of the times he's playing Jordan.
Yeah.
So
Armin Gilliam, the hammer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Justin, when you're looking at these Jordan games, you're mostly looking at stint data, right? You're mostly going for when he's on the floor, when he's off the floor. You're not specifically charting his blocks and steals or his other box score stats to verify them. So my story drops on Yahoo, and your reaction was what? And how did that change, I guess, your view of that year of Michael Jordan? Because it was statistically arguably his best season ever, and maybe the greatest season ever statistically. But of course, you've already watched a bunch of those games. So what was your reaction to my piece?
So before the piece dropped, you had reached out to me. You're doing your due diligence, and you did reach out to me, but we didn't collaborate on that, right? So I didn't quite know to the extent of what you were seeing. You're like, hey, do you think that this could be happening? And I was like, maybe, I don't know. And we kind of just had you asked me the question of if his numbers are wrong, would that make you question whether or not he deserved the Defensive Player of the Year? And I gave you a true statistician answer with it depends, right? So it depends on the extent. It depends on how the other players are and how their stats are recorded. Watching, like, going through the memory of those games, I was like, oh, no, he was a hell of a defender that year. And I'm curious to see what you're going to come up with. I'm going to kind of take it with a grain of salt. I'm curious, like, are you actually going to put in the hours and hours of work to do this? Are you going to select the right games? Like, I'm asking the natural data collection type questions. So when the article comes out, I'm like, no way. This can't be right. So I know Rainus. I reached out to him and I'm like, come on, man, is this real? And he's like, yeah, I looked at it and I fully respect Rainus. Not to say I don't respect you, but I've had a relationship with Rainus for a long time. And I was like, okay, well, you know what? I'm gonna double check this because I don't think these numbers are right. There's no way that he's 50% off on this. I'm gonna find out that Tom doesn't know how to count steals properly. That's what I'm after, right? And to do each game and to be correct about it, you don't just go and look at the games and try and count the steals. You have to look at every single box score element of every single player in that game because you don't know if something's going to be charged as a defensive rebound strip or an offensive rebound for a player. So you have to make sure that outside of counting the steals, you say, okay. And the reason I bring this up, by the way, segue, is there's a 1991 Denver Nuggets game that Tom had done. And there's a Danny Shays play where he grabs the ball, but as he starts to bring it down, Jordan rips it from him. Mm-hmm. I look at that play and I'm like, okay. I'm like, if I'm in the heat of the moment doing all the stat recording that I've done all these years, that is a defensive rebound for Michael Jordan. Right? That's how I would mark that because Danny Shays did not have full gather of the ball. He was not even on the ground. He was coming downward in this motion. The ball stripped at his chest, or I think it's just below his chest, but before he puts it into his cradle. And when you're kind of taught how to mark some of the data, we always mark it based off like possession. And the easiest way to check when a possession is counted is when a referee makes a signal, like a loose signal or a possession signal, or even turn their body signal, or more importantly, when the 24-second clock changes.
Right.
And so if you see a deflection, like if Jordan deflects the ball and there's a scramble and everyone's batting it around and the offensive team takes it back, if that shot clock went from 9 to 5, no possession changes has happened officially. So
if you can see the shot clock, right, Justin?
If you can see the shot clock, yes. So there is a play that happens in the Denver Nugget game where they're bringing up the ball, and then 5 seconds later, the announcer says, shot clock's down to 8. And I'm like, oh, well, I know for certain it hasn't changed because we're not teleporting in this game. Right. So you have to take all those factors into account, right? So I go through the Nuggets game, and I remember I got to the end, I go, son of a B. I'm like, I got the exact same number he did. All right, let's go check another game. And I went through every single game that you went through, and I came up with the exact same results.
Congratulations, Tom.
Yeah.
You did it.
You did it.
The NSA has verified your work.
I like to say I was a little salty about it, man, because I don't like seeing some of these numbers not aligning with what's actually happening on video evidence. So I'm more a little like, damn you, Tom. But at the same time, we should really have a correct representation of our history going forward to make sure that when we talk about our history, we're actually talking about it appropriately.
Justin, I want to ask you to that. No, like, what was the most shocking finding, either that you found on your own, that you verified on your own, or afterwards when you realized Tom had done his research correctly? What was the most shocking piece of information? Like, I can't believe that happened.
I think the most shocking is that there were several games where it was double the amount. I mean, just if it's one or two, then that's home cooking. Like that at that point, that's there's games where I actually, because of Tom, you disrupted my stint counting process for about 3 weeks because no, it's all good. So
I'm so sorry.
I went back to check.
I feel like
Eaton's.
this is a national importance. Like I've screwed up our national security by putting this on your lap.
No,
It's a matter of national security. I'm sorry.
It is all good, man. So calling back to the original where we're talking about, what does this say about his Defensive Player of the Year award? And I said, we have to look at all the other players because he's still in competition with others. Who else got home cooking? So I went back and checked Mark Eaton games. And there's some games where Mark Eaton gets a couple sketchy blocks in there. There are games where Stockton gets like an extra assist here and there. There are games where Alvin Robertson gets an extra steal here and there. And there's one game that, since we're on a podcast and people are going to see this, I'll put the call out there. If anyone has a copy of the Spurs Bulls game from the 1987-88 season, that Spurs Bowl game in San Antonio, I will give you $100 for a copy, a full intact copy of that game. All right. That is a game that I want desperately because Alvin Robertson had 8 steals that game and Jordan had, I think, 2. So we see the inversion on the stat counting, and Alvin Robertson never had an 8-steal game outside of that San Antonio game. So
it just so happens that he gets his 8-steal game with the Steel King himself.
And the Steel King has one of his worst steal games against a team who is pretty privy to turnovers. So, they were allergic to protecting the ball, I think, as Frank Vogel once said in a team discussion. So, going back through that,
you had 28 reported steals in the 6-game sample. And I collected all of your box scores and tracking that you posted on Twitter and came out to 12 observed Justin Jacobs, 12 observed Michael Jordan steals across those 6 games for an excess of 16. So what you're saying is, it might be, okay, here, maybe you see 1 or 2 here or there, but more than double of home cooking or just discrepancy of 12 to 28. That's astounding. And that's kind of where Rainus and I were at, where it's like in some games he would have 2 real steals and 6 in the box score, or 1 real steal and then 5 in the box score. And it's like, this is so much worse than we thought.
Yeah. So I decided to take it a step further, and I did about 5 more games after that. And the discrepancy wasn't as bad. And there's a cap to it. So you took some of his highest steal games. So if I don't have his highest steal games, there's less to, in your words, home cook at that point, right? So if there's 4 steals and he gets 3, which happened, if he got 3 steals and he had 2, which happened, but there was also games where he had 3 and he did get 3 for it. So I think you've uncovered the largest discrepancies. I don't want to say you uncovered all the largest discrepancies because we don't have all the games. I'm still missing about 35 games, and there's a couple of games where he has 5 or 6 steals in there.
I don't have the 10 steal game.
We don't have the 10 steal game. No one has it. And when I asked the league office for it, all they have are the highlights. So they do have a tape of it. They do have a tape of it. It is, and when I say tape, it's film. So it's not the tape you can pop in. It is film that's at the Secaucus repository.
And you theoretically could get it, but if as an employee of an NBA team, you could request it. The cost is, I'm not gonna say it's exorbitant. Obviously, a team could, a business could afford it, but like justifying it to your boss would be a little difficult. Like, wait, why are we paying, $700 or whatever it is for this game from 1988 that's on, as you put it, on a reel to reel that we have to then convert to, a medium that we can digest in and disseminate it. So it's funny. The league has it. We could clear this shit up real quick, but they make a structure of bureaucracy and red tape surrounding it that makes it very difficult to get to those videos.
I think there is, to a degree, some bureaucracy issues with it because there's going to be copyright holdings, and how is that tape going to be used going forward? Because they don't want to damage any part of the legacy of the league. There's several factors to it. which are definitely sensible business decisions. But at the end of the day, the NBA is not a film conversion company. They are an entertainment company that focuses on basketball as their product. So the contractors that they have brought in, and this is from public speaking, this is not any inside knowledge, the contractors they've come in to do the film conversion have not been able to hold up to their agreement and have been released. I think the first one initially is already bankrupted. So they just haven't had the resources or the companies to come and do the conversion for them. I think they created the Vault back in 2010, maybe, with this 5-year plan of having every game digitized. And here we are in 2024. And, we get 10 to 15 games per team at the bottom of the NBA video site. So there's a lot of things that are missing. That 10 steal game, I'd love to have that too. I'd like to point out that in the clips they have, and I'm going off memory, so this, I can't remember which number it is. There are 6 or 7 steals in there.
Yes.
Now, questionably, you say, okay, well, where are the other 3 or 4? And we will never know until we get our hands on that game and take the 2 to 2.5 hours to do the necessary auditing against it.
Yeah. So you've watched more Michael Jordan tape than I think any human alive. It's possible. What is your interpretation of the article that I had written, coupled with your own eyes and your own assessment of Michael Jordan's defense? I guess my question is, I think it's emblematic of Michael Jordan's style defensively that he's hunting for steals and he's gambling so much defensively because he is the most athletic guy on the floor. He can go across the floor and swipe at Doc Rivers and then recover all the way to the other side of the floor in a blink of an eye. So he can do things that no other player can, but that also leaves him to the Allen Iverson problem, which is he might be gambling on a steal, but the guy cuts back door behind him and then it gets an easy basket. And that's not recorded in the box score as a missed steal, for example. So those happened occasionally when I would watch these games, but I guess, did it even out for you? He might have gotten a bunch of steals, even if there's some phantom steals and fake steals here and there. He still was on the road, tied for 4th most steals in the NBA. So he's already getting, objectively, I would say, a ton of legit steals. However, when you're watching, incorporating his block shots and his rim protection, which is real, very real, you would say Michael Jordan was excellent defensively that year, deserving of the Defensive Player of the Year? Or do you feel like now that you know that some of these stats might be fraudulent, maybe we pull it back and say he was a really good defender, but maybe some other players deserved Defensive Player of the Year?
So I went and pulled the Defensive Player of the Year voting stats. So Michael Jordan had 37 that year. Mark Eaton had 9 votes, and Akeem Olajuwon had 7. After that, it was Alvin Robertson at 6, and then it just trails off to low-level guys, low number guys. After I looked at those players, Jordan, Robertson, Eaton, and took what you were saying in your article into account, and then going back, I actually was really scrutinizing the video when I was recording these stats too. You're absolutely right. He was a massive gambler on the court, and I think everyone kind of accepts this. And it was to a degree, exactly as you say. It's not just guys backdooring on them. It were guys that were fading off and hitting jumpers because he is 20 feet away from his man. There were situations where he get called for fouls because he's poking on a big man from behind. And one guy who would abuse him throughout his entire career for doing this was Akeem Olajuwon. And the only guy who I could not find any type of discrepancy in stats was Akeem Olajuwon. So if there's anything that you would have convinced me on is, why didn't Akeem get more than 7 votes? And you said it yourself, Jordan had 4th highest steals on the road. I did check a few road games. Those road games were pretty much matching out. Okay. Sometimes you'd expect road games to have them flipped. to say like if he actually had 3 steals and they're given 2, he was actually given credit. Every game I checked, he had exactly the steals that you expected him to have. And again, it was like 2 or 3 games. It was not much. So it tells me that Jordan is still up there in steals. Robertson wasn't getting as much inflation in the games I saw. And again, like Alvin Robertson, I have like 6-7 games total. So, I can't go across the board on them. So it kind of says that you're credible in questioning whether or not the Defensive Player of the Year award is merited. That is definitely a credible question. To the extent to say that it's not merited is like, well, we're not entirely sure because the voting discrepancy was so off. His steal count is still high. But when you look at the actual video, and I actually have some rotation data about this, because when you look at the video, he gambles so much that there will be situations where he will get 2 or 3 great defensive plays, and then his defensive tactics will lead to 2 or 3 direct scores from a team. And that all evens back out at the end of the day. So if you're highlight hunting, you're going to find 10 highlights from Jordan in a game, just from defensive execution. 3 steals, 1 or 2 blocks, and my God, he was phenomenal from the behind the back block where he would chase down a big who's fading away and he comes and nabs them. Yes. So James Edwards was susceptible to that. Charles Oakley later on in life was susceptible to that a lot with the Knicks. So he was great at block hunting from behind, off his guy. If you go, so there's a metric that I use when I work with pro teams with how good is a player, a stealer, if you will. So like Steph Curry, for example, people view him as a great defensive player because he gets steals. When I worked with a particular Western Conference team, which I actually have an NDA saying I can't say who I worked for, we found out that he was one of the worst on-ball defenders and made it a point to put him in so many PNRs to make him guard the ball that he had his worst steal counts, and we almost knocked him out of the playoffs because they couldn't figure out how to pre-switch until like game 5. So that's kind of the Jordan situation. Only Jordan was bigger and stronger. So if you drove on Jordan, he was going to knock you down if he needed to. He could do you like a Detroit Piston if he needed to, but his steals weren't going to come from that. His steals are going to come from ball hawking, from attacking from the weak side, from some element of surprise. I would say it's a Detroit Piston version of Fat Lever or John Stockton or Michael Adams, or Muggsy Bogues even, where he was going to use brute strength and size to get those steals from the weak side or other positions off his player than he would by attacking a passing lane as like a very quick guard. So those are kind of the takeaways I have. But like I said, it leads to this net zero response, or net zero between offense and defense. As I look at the different stints, and I can't like pull it up on the screen for you guys here, but I have a stint where it's the collection of 5 players that are playing together, the number of possessions that are logged. And by the way, in those 1,800 games, I have something in the order of like 350,000 possessions recorded. So that's how many possessions I've seen during this time between 1984 and 1996.
You've watched 350,000 possessions. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So that's like 50,000 some for Jordan himself. But when Jordan's on the floor, for the most part, his defensive rating for his stints is approximately 105 to 110 points, which for a defensive player of the year candidate, that's not phenomenal number. Exactly. Right. It's not a phenomenal number, but there are situations where you see Jordan's stint group, and, now we're getting to the order of like 115 to 120 defensive possessions where they do drop down to 98. And the best stint in 1987, it's a really wild one, where their defensive rating over 100 possessions is 76, which means 76 points given up in 100 possessions, which is pretty good. But that was led by Rory Sparrow. And it's the only time Rory Sparrow pops up on the list. Now, this is interesting because if you go back and look at Rory Sparrow games, you find out that Rory Sparrow is a hell of an on-ball defender. He is not much of anything else.
Once a Nick, always a Nick.
Yeah. The famed legend Miami Heat, Rory Sparrow. No, I'm kidding. So he came from the Knicks. I don't know if he had a destination between Knicks and Chicago. but he's part of that. I'm blanking on his name. Hubie Brown, is that the coach from the 80s next? Thank you.
Yep.
So he's part of that Hubie Brown, stick a hand up your ass and a hand in their face type defensive group. So you have your Darrell Walkers, who are a phenomenal on-ball defender of the 80s. You have your Rory Sparrows, the team. You got Gerald Wilkins, who is a tough SOB as a small forward in the body of a shooting guard.
Jordan stopper.
Yeah, he was a tough dude. Watching him in the 80s, so to see his later years was like, oh man, I wish he could have had the fame and success of.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? I don't know.
That's the father, Damian Wilkins. Yeah.
Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah, no, watching Gerald Wilkins play in the 80s is amazing, and you kind of wish that he got more notoriety like his brother did, famed, Dominique Wilkins, because he was a great player. But Rory Sparrow would play on ball. And then that allowed players like Michael Jordan to do their thing.
To roam, basically to play free safety.
That's right. But they also had another player who was very underappreciated from that era because he was not a great NBA player. He was not an all-star caliber player. He was never in the discussion for even most improved player. But that's Brad Sellers. So proud Wisconsin.
That's Rainus' favorite, by the way. Rainus loved watching Brad Sellers play. And you could see the prototype, like how fluid he was, how tall he was, and the skill. It just never really, like you said, it didn't translate into all-stars.
So I know guys who played with Brad Sellers growing up. I actually am friends with a couple of his college teammates at Wisconsin. So I asked him about what's the deal with Brad? Because, Brad played at Wisconsin, transferred to Ohio State after a couple frustrating years with the Badgers. So the knock on Sellers was that he just didn't have the intestinal fortitude to play at the level that was going to be demanded of him to play on a playoff caliber team. Yeah. So the way I view Brad Sellers is he is Scottie Pippen without Scottie Pippen's drive. He had the length. He had the ability. I mean, he was a 7-foot shooting guard. He could play the perimeter. His length was phenomenal on defense, but you could not count on him on offense. He did not have that attacking drive that Scottie developed over the years. And his court awareness was a little bit lower. But his length, when he's not the primary guy guarding the ball, is phenomenal. You lose your one 3-point shooter that every team had in the 80s that was going to take their 4 or 5 attempts. He was the guy who was going to stop them on that lineup. And then you got 2 big dudes who are just going to clear out the lane and make sure that no offensive rebounds happen with Dave Corzine.
Oakley.
The guy could rebound. That's about it. He was going to get you rebound and 5 fouls. And he was around for a very long time. He was part of those good Sonics teams back in the day. Had a very good career with the Bulls, a very good 8th man, but starter for the Bulls. And then you had Charles Oakley. So you had that lineup built where you could protect the ball, you could attack the passing lanes, and then you had big guys to clear out to limit second chance points. And when you had that lineup together, you were going to get a great defensive rating. Now, does that defensive rating translate to Jordan? Probably not. But so outside of that, you get rid of that lineup, you've got every single Jordan-led defensive team that's hovering around 105 to 110 for a rating, which is pedestrian.
Yeah. I guess to summarize, Michael Jordan's defensive accolades and all the defensive player of the year, all defense teams, and then the player of the year in 88. Merited or somewhat very overrated, somewhat overrated, just right, underrated or very underrated.
Oh, man. Give me you give me so many options.
Okay,
that's too many options, Tom.
Very overrated, slightly overrated, neither overrated nor underrated, slightly underrated, very underrated.
I'd go slightly overrated at that point. And I'm speaking for the defensive player of the year. And the caveat I have there is Akeem Olajuwon that year, I think just did not. And I think it's because the Rockets didn't do well. And Akeem was doing what Akeem does. So if you see a player doing the same thing over and over again, and the team is pedestrian, they were 45 and 37 that year, 46 and 36. They were somewhere around there. They were stuck in the logjam of those middle seeds in the West. Then you tend to, Akeem had brilliant. I mean, he was even injured for that 3-year period. He was playing injured between 86, 87, and 88. So just 3 years, and it's like, okay, well, Akeem's doing what he's doing. He's getting his 4 blocks a game. And Akeem got like 3 steals a game or 2.5 steals a game, which is still unheard of for a big. But when you watch Akeem, there are possessions where Akeem is guarding all 5 guys in the same possession. He will switch off and he will come out to the perimeter and disrupt a shot. And like Tom said, those things don't end up in the box score. But when you look at the ratings that come out with Akeem-led offenses, they aren't 110. They're 98.
Yeah, defenses, yeah.
And even though the Utah Jazz, and Tom actually brought this up to me, that Mark Eaton's Utah Jazz had I think they were first on defensive rating, I think you told me.
Yep.
So I went back and looked at that, and I actually have Mark Eaton's numbers from the sample I got. There's some 130 and 120 ratings, defensive ratings, with Eaton leading it. And guess who they're missing in those stints, in those lineups?
Stockton?
That's right. And when Stockton's in there, they're at 90, 102, 103, 93, 103, 87. But you remove Stockton, and especially if you remove Thurl Bailey from that team, then you're at 122, 131, 129, 131, 131. That's...
I wanted to ask you before we let you go. I think you said this publicly. Were people paying you to review my games?
No.
Did people ask you to review these games?
No.
Okay.
No one came out and said, "Hey, can you review this for us?" No league official, no private group.
I was talking about fans. Like, fans were like, "Hey, Justin, I would like you to watch these games and verify these stats." I've
had a couple of people ask me to like say, "Hey, you should," but I just didn't do it for them. I wanted to do it. I wanted to do it because I want to make sure that the stats we have are correct. There are some things that people will say, and you're not the only one. So I don't mean to make you feel special, Tom, but there are some things that get claimed where I'm like, I don't feel that's true, and I'll go back. And there's some people that do that to me. So, I'm blanking on his name, and he's a fantastic guy. I think it's Dan Dickey. I think his name is Dan Dickey. There's been times where I've had a claim on something, and this is a couple of years ago, and I remember him like sending me an email saying, "Hey, I don't think this number's quite right. Can you go back and check?" And I was like, "Sure, why not? I trust you. You seem to be a good guy." And it turns out that I was actually like double counting something. And I wasn't removing the double count. So one of the challenges we do have is that when you do stint counting, if there's a substitution in the middle of the stint, I will actually double count the stint for that stint, which is fine. That's because those offenses are playing those stints. If you don't score in the first 15 seconds of a stint, you should still get credit for playing that stint because you had 15 seconds to try and score the ball. The fact that you went in and came back out and the ball got deflected out of bounds, that just means you didn't execute. So, but at the game level, if I kept those stints in there and just added the stints and not subtracted out the double stints, I actually was deflating the ratings overall for the game. So that's something I got called out for. So I've gone back and have adjusted those for the game level. So I always encourage people to like fact check, but do it in a very systematic way that aligns with how stats are recorded in the NBA. But no one came up and said, well, I had people say, I'll buy you more games if I could to try and prove you wrong. A lot of them were.
You go get that 88 Spurs Bulls game.
Oh my God, $100 for that game. I will give that up. I actually did that offer. God, Celtics Rockets 1981. I think it was 81 or it's 80. I forget. It's lost in history.
The finals or
80. It was 80. It was the when the Rockets were still in the East. So it was Larry Bird's first season. And I think it was only a 3-game series. I'm trying to remember. It's been so long. But everyone believes that footage is lost. I offered $200 per game, and I found a collector who had every single one of them. So I managed to get every single Celtics Rockets game that's considered lost. So you just got to know where to try and look. But outside of that, Tom, if they were like, we'll pay you $1,000 to prove him wrong, like something like that didn't happen. It was more the angry Twitter mafia that wanted to blasphemize you for for saying horrible things about Michael Jordan.
Well, look,
Justin. Last question. One last question. Like, we started this with you telling us you charted the fourth quarter for Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game, and that the final score of the game is not the same as what the final score on the broadcast is not the same as the final score in the box score that's posted online. Where did the phantom points go?
So back in the 1960s, teams didn't necessarily have scorekeepers. They didn't have is it Bob Rosenberg for the Chicago Bulls? They didn't have guys like that. So what they would do is they would employ a local newspaper journalist to record the stats of the game, and then they would provide box score data at the end. So a lot of the NBA data that's populated on NBA or stats.nba.com are actually coming from, if I remember this correctly, I might get this wrong. I want to say it came from Justin Kubatko when he was starting up Basketball Reference, and he collected a lot of the data from the box scores in the newspaper. So as I've gone through this video process, I'll find where the video evidence proves that the box score was wrong. And then I'll actually send an email, to when I was working for the NBA, I would send an email to my boss saying, hey, check this out. I'd send an email to Mike Lynch, who is like the director of relations for Basketball Reference. And then I would have to send him a copy of the game for proof to show that, hey, we got to fix this. So halftime scores would be wrong, or player fouls would be wrong, or something like that. But it's very rare, especially in the 80s, it became very rare. But in the 60s, it was habitual. And in that very particular Wilt Chamberlain game, the game was played in Hershey. It was March 4th, 1962, something like that. Mm-hmm. They sent the newspaper writer to be the stat keeper for the game from Philadelphia. So he drove out to the game. There's an urban legend that when Wilt scored his 100th point, that they canceled the game and everyone stormed the court. So the storming the court does happen. You do hear it in the fourth quarter where the announcers going bananas because they're like, they're storming the court, and you hear screaming, and it's just chaos for 2 minutes. But then the game goes back and starts playing. And I think the person doing the newspaper writing stopped there. And the last 43 seconds of the game, which had 6 buckets or, 12 total points scored between the two teams. It was, Knicks, was it Philadelphia Warriors at the time? I think it was Warriors. I get confused too because of the move in the 60s. I have a feeling that the newspaper reporter stopped there because I think that's actually the score with 43 seconds remaining. And there's an actual part where, what is his name? It's not. Oh, I wish I could remember. It's like Arlick. Oh, I got it. Joe Rucklick. Joe Rucklick was shooting free throws in the game. This was with 10 seconds left, and Rucklick. And this is the story that comes from these guys. It's been reported many times from those who covered the players that played in the game. So this is actually a Joe Rucklick story, as told and in print media, but people forget it. Rucklick told Chamberlain, I'm going to miss this free throw so you can get 102. And the referee said, if you do that, I will kick your ass out of here. So Rucklick had to shoot the free throw normal because no one wanted to see Chamberlain get off of 100. And Chamberlain played out the rest of that game. So because we had a newspaper reporter covering the stats, and then he was more focused, most likely speculation, pure projection, probably more focused on getting the article set and his questions set to talk about this 100-point game and to tell how rushed it was. They didn't know how to take a good picture of Chamberlain, and he had already made it to the locker room. So they grabbed a nearby piece of paper and quickly wrote with Sharpie 100 and said, hold this, which is why we have this very comical, high production value 100-point picture. But in light of that, there are many games that suffer from the very same symptom of that, where there's going to be rebounds that are there's an inflation in rebounds in some games. You can find some box scores where there's more rebounds plus team rebounds than misses between field goals and free throws combined, which is physically impossible. Right. There's even games where you're going to find more steals than there are turnovers in a game.
Well, there's one of those Jordan games, right?
There was a Jordan game where it was 12 and 12.
I was going to say, I don't think there was ever a Jordan game that had it higher, but there was a Jordan game that had it matched, and you clearly see two dead ball situations. I think it was a travel was one of them, and you cannot get a steal on a travel. That's You can get a steal off of a deflection as long as that deflection goes off of an opponent and out of bounds. You do get credit for a steal on that. You also get credit for a steal on a jump ball. So if a player's dribbling and you tug the ball on them and they call jump ball and you win that jump, you get credit for the steal because you initiated that turnover. So there are some subtleties that are out there. But those of those 12 and 12, I'm using the numbers that we kind of said here. I don't remember exactly, but of those like 12 and 12, there were 2 that were clearly not that. So there were more live ball turnovers or steals than live ball turnovers.
Justin, you've done amazing work here with us on Basketball Illuminati, but we do have
award.
to. Yeah, you're going to get another award for this performance here. We do have to enlist you and contract you to examine the irises of the third eyes out there. So that's your final project here. You can stop doing security work or the NBA stint data. What we need you for is the serious work of examining third eyes.
All right, I'll see what I can do. I hope it pays more than the national labs.
We'll do what we can.
It pays in the knowledge of a job well done.
It pays, period. All right.
If anyone wants to support, if anyone wants to support your work, Justin, or help you out, how can they do that?
I think the best way is to just provide access to games. That's probably the easiest way. I have enlisted a couple guys in the past to try and help me do some stint calculations, and then of course I fact check it because I don't trust anyone. It's been tough, so I prefer to run with what I do, having 2 people in the league office that will fact check me. And then I have 1 external person outside that'll fact check. I prefer to run with that. And those other 3 are kind of, they're already swamped as is, so they can't keep up with the grind that I've been working on. So getting access to games and, I think that's it. Like, okay. I don't do this. I don't do this for the money. I do it because this is fun. It's one thing I enjoy. I hate going on to forums and seeing people try and say blasphemous things about any type of player and not have any backing. They're just like, oh, the eye test. And it's like, okay, well, I'm pretty sure you're not watching games because I'm collecting data while watching the games and neither of them are agreeing with you. So I do it more for the fun. So access to games would be the best way to go.
Squared2020.com, Squared2020 on X. Go follow Justin Jacobs and support the man. You're doing great work. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. This has been fun.